Sunday mornings in our neighborhood were usually quiet, the kind of quiet that made you feel almost guilty for disturbing it. Birds chirped lazily, sprinklers hissed on manicured lawns, and the occasional neighbor jogger waved as they passed. For most people, it was the perfect time to sip coffee on the porch or tackle chores without distraction. For me, it was the perfect time to finally deal with my backyard mess. A neglected tangle of weeds, overgrown shrubs, and a pile of branches I'd been avoiding for months. I had parked my old SUV at an angle in my driveway to make room for hauling debris and tools, fully aware that part of my front yard sloped slightly into the edge of the street. Technically, the vehicle blocked, maybe a foot or two of the curb. But it was still entirely on my property, and no one's access was impeded. I had triple-checked the city code and neighborhood regulations. No violations. I even took a picture before starting work, just in case. From the window of my living room, I noticed movement across the street. Karen Smith. If every suburban neighborhood had a stereotype, she would be it. Perfectly coiffed hair, crisp clothes that looked like they'd never felt the wind, and a scowl that could make dogs cower. She was standing by her front gate, phone in hand, eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting prey. I sighed and went back to work, thinking she might just glare silently like the rest of the neighbors. I was wrong. She stormed across the street with the kind of fury that seemed to pull the very air along with her. "Excuse me, you cannot block the street like that," she shouted, voice carrying as if auditioning for a courtroom drama. Her phone was already raised, camera recording my every move. I wiped sweat off my brow, squinting. Hi Karen, it's my driveway, my car, and it's not blocking anyone's driveway or the street. You can check the property lines if you like." Her face twisted into something almost cartoonish, part disbelief, part indignation. "That's not the point. You shouldn't be doing this. I'm calling the police." She whipped out her phone and began dictating to the 911 operator with an intensity that would make any actor envious. I could hear snippets. "Blocked the street, causing a hazard. Selfish behavior." She even waved her hands dramatically for effect. I tried to intervene calmly, raising my hands in a gesture of reason. "Karen, seriously, you don't need to do that. It's my property. There's no hazard, no traffic, nothing illegal. Please just..." Too late. She had already completed the call and was pacing in a tight circle, like a caged tiger. The scene drew attention. Neighbors peeked out from windows, some whispering behind curtains, others leaning on fences, trying not to look too involved, but unable to resist the spectacle. I could feel my face heating up, not from embarrassment, but from sheer disbelief. How could someone turn a simple matter like parking into a personal vendetta? Then came the sirens, faint at first, growing louder. 2 police cars pulled up in tandem, lights flashing, but no one in a rush. The officers stepped out, calm but authoritative, approaching the center of the drama. Karen practically puffed herself up, chest forward, ready to deliver her full, rehearsed complaint. "Good afternoon, officers," she began, voice dripping with self-righteousness. "This neighbor here has blocked the street illegally. I had to call because..." "Ma'am," one officer interrupted, polite but firm. "We'll take a look and determine the situation." They walked over to my SUV and glanced at the positioning. One officer bent down, examining the curb, while the other checked city codes on a tablet. I stood aside, trying not to smirk. Karen's jaw tightened as the first officer said, "The vehicle is entirely on the property, and it doesn't impede traffic or access to neighboring driveways." Karen's eyes went wide. "What? No, that can't..." The officer continued, "Legally, there's no violation here. You called for a non-existent offense." She spluttered. But it's the principle. You can't just..." The second officer shook his head, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Ma'am, the principle doesn't override the law. Please avoid making false reports in the future." "Have a good day." Karen's face turned bright red, and she stormed back toward her house, muttering under her breath. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered that she had a long history of harassing neighbors over the smallest perceived slights. The police left, sirens fading, leaving the quiet street behind. I returned to the backyard, sweaty and annoyed, but also strangely triumphant. For the first time in months, I could focus on my work without Karen hovering, phone ready to broadcast some imagined crime. But suburban peace is often fragile. As I hauled branches into the wheelbarrow, I could sense that this incident would ripple far beyond the driveway. Karen wasn't the type to accept being shown up, and our neighborhood's HOA meetings were always fertile ground for escalating tensions. By late afternoon, whispers began circulating among neighbors. Some were chuckling about Karen's dramatic meltdown, others shaking their heads in disbelief. A few even came over to check on me, making light conversation about the incident. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patel, leaned over her fence with a wry smile. "You know, honey, Karen's got a history. Today's just another episode." I laughed, though it was tempered with caution. "Yeah, seems like she can't resist turning everything into a spectacle." By evening, the neighborhood had settled into its usual calm. But I stayed alert, expecting some follow-up from Karen. After all, when someone is that invested in being the neighborhood's self-appointed sheriff, they rarely quit after one failure. Sure enough, later that night, I heard the faint click of her camera from across the street, an unmistakable sound. She had returned to her front gate, probably recording the empty driveway and imagining some new complaint. I ignored it and focused on finishing the last of the yard work. As I finally sat down with a glass of water, I reflected on the absurdity of it all. Here I was, simply trying to do some weekend chores, and Karen had escalated a parking angle into a full-blown police investigation. But at the same time, I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing the law and common sense was on my side. Little did I know her story wasn't over. That single call to the police would set off a chain reaction that would ripple through the HOA, the neighborhood, and eventually culminate in an outcome no one, including Karen, could have predicted. For now, though, I could finally take a deep breath, lean back on the porch, and watch the sunset without the looming shadow of Karen's scowl. The driveway was mine, the SUV was legally parked, and for the first time that day, peace had returned, if only temporarily.